It's known as the greatest spectacle in racing. It's one part of the Triple Crown that Fernando Alonso hasn't won yet. It is, of course, the Indianapolis 500. Joining me to look ahead to the 107th running of the race is Philip Mathew from the GSP. Welcome back to the show, Phil. How are you today?
Thanks, Aaron. I'm glad to be on. I love the Indianapolis 500. It's been a part of my life for so many years, and as I said earlier, I don't have any problem talking about the Indianapolis 500. I could talk about it for days, and it's part of 1/3 of the greatest day in motorsports. So, you have Monaco earlier in the day, of course, to start. You have Indy in the middle, and then the Coca-Cola 600 at night for people who like NASCAR's longest race. So it's really a great day if you like cars going around in circles, as some people like to say, and fast.
Excellent. And tell us about the GSP, your podcast.
Yeah, the Grip Strip podcast, myself and Josh Fine, we go and talk about all things motorsports. Like, Greatest Day in Motorsports is going to be the name of the show for this week. Talk about all three races, preview them. We'll also go and talk about racing from last week. Of course, Imola being flooded out, so we don't have anything. We'll just give our prayers to the people affected. But, we talk about all different racing. As long as 2 and 4 wheels, I usually say as long as it goes fast, we talk about it on the Grip Strip podcast. So that's the short of it. You can basically find it anywhere where you find podcasts.
Brilliant. And of course, I echo your sentiments, sending our best wishes to the people of Emilia-Romagna, the surrounding areas, obviously the devastating floods that resulted in the only decision that Formula One could possibly take in cancelling the race at Imola. And lo and behold, it probably won't be rescheduled because we've got a million races in Formula One this year. So they've left themselves absolutely no wiggle room on that, which, considering the way the climate is going, and I know this is going to get all sort of environmentalist for a moment, but considering the way that the environment is going, we're getting more and more flooding in lots of areas, places where it didn't happen before. We're getting extreme heat. So we're going to see potentially races be flooded out like this in places where you didn't necessarily expect it. They're going to have to think about that and how they reschedule things in the future. But let's look back to start with, actually. Let me get your thoughts on this season's IndyCar racing. I think it's probably not hard to say it's been better than the Formula One season so far. It's certainly been more competitive. It's probably the most competitive series that I've watched this season.
Yeah, so I'm in between pages, so I forget where I'm muted on. But yeah, IndyCar, I mean, they market themselves as the closest and most competitive series when they do bother to market, and it is true right now. The competition has been close all season. They've raced on permanent road courses. They've raced on temporary street circuits and at an oval. And they, of course, will be racing at the most famous oval, it's a rectangle, but the most famous oval in the world this weekend. Pato Award, people are familiar on your side of the aisle with Pato, with his time in Formula 2. McLaren test driver Alex Palou, who we're going to talk about here shortly, another McLaren test driver. And those two guys are up there in points. And Marcus Ericsson, who used to be in Formula One, he's third in points and has been pretty solid and is a defending Indianapolis 500 champion. So the series is strength on strength, going. And there's some great performances. Romain Grosjean has been up there this year, but hasn't been able to close the deal just yet. I'm not so sure that's going to happen this weekend, but going to Detroit next week, the following week, I think he would be a sure pretty good favorite. And then there's plenty of other guys in this field that can win on any given race day as long as they have the right setup and the right situation. So, I mean, when you have 27 cars on a grid full time in a series, they haven't had that kind of depth and quality in maybe ever. They used to have 27, 28 cars back in the day, but wasn't this level or this quality.
Yeah, that's something that's really impressed me. I started watching IndyCar in 2021 when Grosjean went there after his accident in Bahrain. And what impressed me most was the depth of quality on the grid. And I'd heard of drivers in the Champ Car series as it was back in the day and IndyCar. So we've had Jacques Villeneuve, Juan Pablo Montoya have come across. And they've done okay in Formula One. Obviously, Villeneuve won the World Championship in a very, very strong Williams in '97. Montoya gave Schumacher a very good run for his money on occasion. But the grid there, drivers like Will Power and Scott Dixon, they are very, very good at what they do. And you look at Dixon, the way he constructs a championship, it's very much like the modern day Lewis Hamilton. He plays the long game, he makes sure he gets the points. He doesn't win every race, he's not on pole every race, but he's always there, he's always a threat. And like you said, so many drivers can win on any given day. If you take the last race, for example, Romain Grosjean and Scott McLaughlin were basically nowhere all weekend, having contended for victory the week before, which just shows you how wide and varied this series is. It's very similar in Formula E as well. And I think that's mostly down to everyone having a spec chassis, and then it's up to you to mechanically engineer it. But then it makes it all the more rewarding when the team and driver combination get it right, and you also get a much more competitive picture, which, it's actually really good that Grosjean and Ericsson haven't gone over there and just wiped the floor with the guys in IndyCar, because that would not be a good message. But that people will say that they're not F1 standard drivers. They absolutely were. They just weren't in the right car. And we've seen what they can do now. Marcus Ericsson, defending Indianapolis 500 champion. And also Takuma Sato's won 2 Indy 500s. Who would have said that in the middle of the 2000s? So it's a very competitive series. It offers everybody a chance. And that's what I love about it. There's just so much that can happen. Even if you're having a rotten season, you can end up on pole position. Christian Lundgaard got his maiden pole last week at the IMS road course. And it's moments like that you don't get quite so often in Formula One. Which race have you enjoyed most this season out of the 5 that we've had?
That is a good question. I mean, for me, I think I enjoyed Long Beach because that was the first win for Kyle Kirkwood. It is considering the potential that he has shown and everybody has known about him for many years, to come out and get that victory in a major, a race that Formula One initially had, or Formula 5000 and Formula One. To win the Long Beach Grand Prix means something. You talk about Monaco, that's the OG of street circuit races, will be forever, no matter the fact that it's a processional race. But Long Beach is right after that, and he did such a great job to qualify well, put himself in a position, manage the race, and that was a great race. And I mean, personally, I've always had an affinity for Long Beach because, Al Unser Jr. was the king of the beach. He won 5 in a row. Michael Andretti was my driver back in the day. He won his first career race there before I was even born, and then he won his last race there of his career. So, I mean, it's a great racetrack. Legends have won there. It's not easy to win at Long Beach. It's been a very varied different winners, 5 different winners so far in 5 races. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's a 6th coming up here on Sunday in the 500.
I must say I really enjoyed the first oval race of the year at Texas Speedway. It was just phenomenal. The performance that Pato O'Ward put on in that race. At one point he was an entire lap on everyone. That was just incredibly, just outstanding performance. That's purely what it was. And look, the caution period is the nemesis of a driver going well in IndyCar. It can catch you out on your very, very best day. And it did to him, because not only did it bring everyone close to him when he was miles ahead, it actually cost him a shot at getting past Joseph Newgarden on the final go round because Romain Grosjean crashed, ironically. So yeah, I mean they finish under caution in IndyCar, and it's not a problem. And talking of ovals, let's look at the Indianapolis 500. We're talking on the Monday after the weekend of qualifying, so we had everyone putting their laps in on Saturday. Then we had the Firestone Fast 12 and the Firestone Fast 6 last night. Alex Palou is the pole man for this year. What an effort that was. The first lap, 235.2 miles an hour. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I mean, this last couple of years, the speeds have been going up, and the fact that Scott Dixon put the best 4-lap average ever last year to win the pole was amazing, and hitting 235 miles an hour average. I mean, we're basically, I think, because we're going to keep this, they're going to keep this package, it's likely that in the next year or two, the overall track record, which was Arie Luyendyk's, is going to be broken. Because these cars, these teams, they massage them, they have them really tuned to the nth degree. And I picked Scott Dixon in the fantasy game because on IndyCar they had a fantasy game for qualifying, and I just assumed he was going to go and tie Rick Mears with poles at Indianapolis with 6, and unfortunately he didn't have the speed on Sunday in the Fast 6. He ended up being 6th, but he also, let's be fair, I think he'd rather get his second Borg Warner trophy on Sunday than win another pole, and especially after last year when he basically made a rare mistake and gave the race away. But Alex Palou is back to the same level he was 2 years ago, even with the fact that more than likely he's going to McLaren next year. He's running at such a high level. He won the Indy Grand Prix. They've been very fast. All the Ganassi cars are fast. That's just a usual thing at Indianapolis. And for him to get that pole, and it was by 0.006 of a mile an hour across 10 miles, 4 laps. I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, it's similar to the bump situation, which I figure we're going to talk about as well, but the margins are so close, and you're talking about it having to hold it together for 4 laps. It's unique. It's unique to the Indianapolis 500. I mean, they do it at Anderson Speedway in the little 500 with sprint cars and a little half-mile track, but that's, it's a grassroots racing. In this case, to do that and on edge the way they have to be, it's crazy.
It really does show you how skillful these guys are, and also how brave they are, because you've got so much talent in this field. And we've heard in the past Michael Schumacher almost poo-poo oval racing because he said, what is there to gain? It's just too dangerous. But if you get it right, like these guys are, I don't actually remember it all through practice either. Anyone crashing this week, and usually we get the odd shunt or two. I remember a few years ago, Sebastian Bourdais had quite a big one. I think that ruled him out of the 500 completely.
In qualifying.
Yeah, in qualifying. So they push so hard and they push right to the limit. And what's really impressive about this year's batch of drivers is none of them have found the wall. They've been close to Kuma Sato, Santino Ferrucci, Alex Palou. They've all got close, but they've just about found the limit and kept it out the barrier. It's just superb. And this is what's really enjoyable about, especially oval racing. You get almost a bizarre sort of grid. So the drivers that have been going really well this year, Grosjean, we've already mentioned, Joseph Newgarden, Scott McLaughlin's a race winner, Carl Kirkwood, they're not even in the Fast 12. And up the front, Arenas VK and Felix Rosenqvist, who've not been having particularly stellar seasons up to this point. But Rosenqvist was on pole in Texas, so you put him on an oval, he knows how to get the job done. Arenas VK has been in the Fast 6, I think, 3 of the last 4 years at Indianapolis, which is an incredible record for a chap who I think lacks a little bit of consistency, but you put him on the Indianapolis 500 track and he just goes absolutely beautifully. But then you've got your usual suspects, Pato O'Ward and Scott Dixon on the second row. I want to talk about Stantino Ferrucci on the second row as well. In fourth place, and have the inside line into turn one at the start on Sunday. He's not been a permanent fixture this year. This was a really top performance from him.
Yeah, the AJ Foyt team, Aaron, has been theoretically the worst team on the grid for many years. Santino Ferrucci, people are familiar with him with some of the antics he had on his way out of Formula 2. And he's bounced around rides in his IndyCar career. But one thing that he's shown is he's very good at Indianapolis. He's a Connecticut guy, so he's not that far away from me as a New Jersey person. So it's kind of a interesting thing. His character, take it or leave it, but when you put him behind the wheel and you give him a good piece, especially at Indianapolis, he's able to do work. And there was a chance there. I mean, he was up there. Him and Felix Rosenqvist were basically the class of qualifying for a good amount of it. AJ Foyt hasn't had a front row starter in years, and there was a chance that Santino Ferrucci could have done that. I don't know what that means on race day. Michael Cannon is a legendary engineer and manager, and he's been incorporated in the team this year. Benjamin Peterson, who is not very, very highly rated under most circumstances, has had a pretty brutal year. Qualifies in the Fast 12. They've had pace all week, but can they convert, qualifying pace into race pace? It's a totally different deal. Ferrucci has proven he can do that. He's done it in different teams and different cars. He's driving a Legends car. AJ Foyt is one of the greatest race car drivers ever lived. His ownership time has not exactly been as successful, but it wouldn't be shocking, really, for them to have a chance on Sunday. Because I think, to be fair, this is the Super Bowl or whatever. This is the big one. This is the whatever Champions League. This is the biggest race of the year. They don't have to do anything else the rest of the year. You win the Indianapolis 500, that's good enough. You win the championship. Nobody really talks about championships unless you've won multiple championships. And even with that, more people care about who wins Indy than the championship, even though it's such a competitive championship.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. It's like, obviously, in Formula One, for people who might not be so familiar with IndyCar racing, Monaco is on the same day and it's part of the Triple Crown. It's referred to as the one they all want to win alongside their home race. And, so many have won it. Charles Leclerc is still trying to win it, and he probably won't win it this year. So let's be honest, because it's Charles Leclerc around Monaco. It doesn't really ever seem to go too well for him. But we don't talk about the winner of Monaco at the end of the season and say, that was the race. Whereas in IndyCar, this, like you say, it's just the Super Bowl. This is the big one. This is the one they all desperately want to win because of the kudos and the history that comes with it. And I don't think they're doing it this year, but it used to carry double points. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No double points this year, thankfully.
Was that just a decision to make it a little bit more equal across the rest of the season, or did they just decide it was too gimmicky or something?
I think it was more of a gimmick, and it really took away from the rest of the championship, because you could have went and done really well at Indy, say, using Rosenqvist as an example. That was basically the peak of his season when he finished in the top 5 at Indy last year. And then the rest of the year was really not all that great. I mean, he qualified, I think he got a pole or maybe 2 poles, but he also was out of a race, so it didn't really make sense. I get it for the fact that it's the biggest race of the year, but in the grand scheme of things, you have more cars than you're going to have at any other race this year. Leave it be, treat it for what it is, just leave it as give it its own due. You don't need double points or gimmicks because a championship usually flushes out without having any gimmicks in there, unlike other series.
And there's one person we need to mention, slightly disappointingly, Graham Rahal is missing this year's Indianapolis 500. He's failed to qualify, which, on the note that you've put on the Google Doc, it's quite significant. It follows his father's did not qualify 30 years ago. Just talk to us about that.
Yeah, I mean, one piece, Aaron, that was going on yesterday in that the whatever Final Four bump session, whatever they called it, was 3 of the 4 Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan cars were in that session. So it was a complete nightmare scenario. In their perfect world, they all qualify better than Stingray Robb, and then he's the one who's having to bump back in, and then they're able to defend and make some sort of strategy. What happened is Stingray Robb qualified second out of that group, and it was between Jack Harvey, who's one of Graham Rahal's closest friends, and Graham Rahal. Jack Harvey was the only one that was able to go and answer, keep on going, and eventually, right at the end, was able to back his way into the Indianapolis 500 at the expense of Graham Rahal. It's crazy to think that 30 years ago, his dad, Bobby Rahal, who's a legend, he was over in Europe with Jaguar when they were around in Formula One. He's involved with multiple manufacturers, and BMW, of course, and sports cars, along with Honda. And 30 years ago, he was coming off of winning the IndyCar championship, beating Michael Andretti for that, before Michael, of course, came to Formula One. And then in 93, he had taken on a new project with a new chassis, trying to make that work. The car was not really fast at Indy. He was in a position where he bumped himself back into the Indianapolis 500, only to be bumped out at the end by a last-minute deal. And Bobby Rahal was a defending champion of the series and had to go home. And that's not the first time that a big name has gone home, a champion has gone home. Most famously, Penske ended up having to go home with the defending IndyCar champion, Indy 500 champion, in Al Unser Jr., and the last 2 winners of the Indy 500 at that point in Al Unser Jr. and Emerson Fittipaldi. So if it can happen to the best teams, it can happen to anybody. And that's one thing that made it was very emotional. I'd never really seen Graham that emotional, but you know how much it means. It's his life. Really, at the end of the day, the one thing he's wanted his whole life is to win Indy, so he can say, I did this with my dad. You know, there's never been, or I don't remember off the top if there's ever been a father and a son that has won the Indianapolis 500. I can't think of it all. Or no, I'm sorry, I just said it. Al Unser Sr. and Al Unser Jr. So other than that, there really hasn't been anyone. Michael Andretti tried for years and was unsuccessful. His dad only won it once, while the thing's going off over there. But, you know, it's just crazy how that all worked out. And it was a nightmare scenario, and it worked out kind of what I thought was going to happen, unfortunately for Graham. Fortunate for Jack Harvey, because he's basically looking for a ride. But he's in the race, and Graham is going to have a lot of soul searching to do.
I think the facts you were talking through there about, you know, Michael Andretti trying to emulate his father in winning it, Graham Rahal trying to emulate his father in winning it. It's just so difficult to win the Indy 500. No matter how often you try, it's just so difficult, and it is such an open race as well. That's the crazy thing. It's so open. Anyone could win. If you're in it, you can win it, and you know you have to be in it to win it, of course. So you can see why it means so much to them, because if they get there, Jack Harvey could be the Indianapolis 500 champion if things fall his way. If you know he stays out of trouble, timing of the cautions are good, strategy's good. You know he makes the right moves at the right time. He can still win the race. It's just so open. Let's talk about the challenge of qualifying versus setting up for the race. Obviously, in qualifying, you're going for as much speed as possible. I don't think we'll be seeing 235-mile-an-hour laps on Sunday. What they'll be practicing? They're practicing right now, I believe, and they'll be practicing through
Yep.
the week. What setup changes are they looking at? Obviously, it's going to be to do with tyre life and car balance. What will they be changing?
Yeah, I mean, you're running this weekend or for the good amount of last week during the practice, they were looking at ultimate speed for 1 and 4 laps, low fuel, maximum horsepower, giving the extra 100 horsepower boost to put up those speeds. And now, starting today for sure, but even for some of these teams last week, it's full tanks, higher downforce, going and figuring out how long you can go on a tank of fuel because gas mileage is huge at Indianapolis. Alexander Rossi won the Indianapolis 500 on fuel mileage. He's had better cars and faster cars since he won the Indy 500 and hasn't been able to win. But that day he did, like you're talking about, everything coming together. You have to have a great handling race car. You have to be able to get through traffic because there's going to be traffic all day. Restarts are sketchy. You'll be on cold tires because there's no tire warmers in IndyCar. You basically be running around for maybe a lap or two, and then you're going to go back under green and having to airmail at about 200 miles an hour to turn one. And for those who listen to your show and under our Formula One people, they understand that Indianapolis, when the Formula One circuit was there, ran through turn one the other way and had the longest straight line or wide open throttle stretch in all of Formula One when that existed during the U.S. Grand Prix at Indianapolis. Well, now in the case of Sunday, you're going to be backing off a little bit, but you don't want to lose the momentum. You want to be able to stay in throttle. You're going to be doing a lot of shifting. You're going to be making a lot of adjustments. And you could have the fastest car for 1 or 4 lap pace, and you could end up just dropping like an anchor by around this time Sunday afternoon, our time. And you need to have everything. I mean, everything has to be right. The right setup, great pit stops, the most pit stops they make all year. You can't make any mistakes. You can't speed. Scott Dixon did. Gave away what was likely going to be his second Indy 500 win. He's one of the greatest drivers ever lived. He's only won it once. There's all these other guys that have only won it once. And then there's great drivers that have never won it. It just has to be, everything just has to go right. And so many things play into winning the Indianapolis 500. And that's part of what makes it the greatest spectacle in racing.
I've watched the Indy 500 for a few years. The first one I watched was 2017 when Fernando Alonso went over. He skipped the Monaco Grand Prix and he was actually in the lead in a McLaren Honda, which, we all fell off our chairs at that point. And then we got back on and laughed when the engine failed, when he was about to win the race. So, it's just there's so many different things that can happen. And like you said, like we've said, it all has to come together. If you aren't an IndyCar follower and you're just tuning in for the Indy 500, try not to get too bogged down in the strategy and what's going on. Just watch it for what it is. It's drivers going fast and taking a lot of risks. There's a lot that can happen. It's going to be a lot to follow. I find IndyCar races not necessarily difficult to follow, but there's a lot going on because of all the strategy that's at play. I think in the IMS road race, we had 2 or 3 different strategies at the front in play. And at one point, all 3 cars were together on track, which was great. F1 could never. So, it's just such an open race. Enjoy it for what it is. It really is the greatest spectacle in racing. But we touched on it earlier being a very difficult race to win. Just why is it so difficult? Is it because there's so much traffic? Is it because you have to get everything perfect? Just talk us through that. Is it because sometimes you get some random winners?
Yeah, I mean, It's like we talked about Takuma Sato. He benefited from Fernando Alonso's engine, and Honda had a really bad day, but in the end, Honda won the race. In 2020, he passed Scott Dixon late in the race after Scott Dixon dominated that day and won his second Indy 500 for Ray Hall Letterman Lanigan. I mean, I've seen this, I've watched it for now 30 something years, and I've seen all kinds of insanity through all these years for the 500, people running out of fuel, people hitting the wall, going into turn 4 on the final lap. I mean, the stuff that you see at Indianapolis, you don't see anywhere else. It's the longest race of the season for the Indy cars. You're the most pit stops, the biggest pressure of the season. For some of these teams, this is it. They know that the rest of this season they're not really going to be up there. They really don't have much of a chance. But you can make your whole entire year in one day. If you put everything together and do it right, everyone's going to talk about you for the rest of the year. No matter the fact you could run 20th the rest of the year, but you're the Indy 500 champion. That's what makes it so. I can't even quantify it, and I've been a fan for this long. It's really like what you said, Aaron. Everything has to be put together, all aspects. You cannot have a weak link. Pit stops, they're going less than, I mean, in Formula One parlance, it's not fast, but you have 30-something people. You're in IndyCar, you have 6 people going over the wall, and they're doing all 4 tires, the fueling, and they have somebody who does for the air jack, and they do pit stops in 8 seconds. Like that's insane. The amount of time from time in and time out, the danger of the pit road because of how narrow it is and how fast they're coming in, trying to make sure you get out in front and not, wreck, which has happened numerous times before. The restarts are very crazy, especially if traffic is involved. The amount that the draft plays a role in how you have to drive and how you have to make your runs makes a key difference. It's what happened to Pato O'Ward. He tried to make his run, but he knew that if he had went outside on the final lap last year, he was going in the wall. So he just basically backed off and lost the race. Other people, Takuma Sato, tried to go low on Dario Franchitti back in 2012, and Dario made his line, and Takuma Sato went in the wall going for the win. Now, of course, he's won 2 Indy 500, so it isn't as bad of a deal, but these drivers will do whatever it takes to win this race, and it's life-changing. And that's really what makes... Because Marcus Ericsson, I never knew him to be a personality. I never knew him to be much of anything back in his Formula One days. And to be fair, to be honest, he wasn't much of a character even early in his IndyCar career. But ever since he won Indy last year, you see him out and about. He's got the beautiful wife now. He's got all these things going on. He's got a personality. People know he's funny. Nobody would have known. But he's the Indy 500 champion. You have people like Tony Kanaan, who's going to be making his last start on Sunday. You have Helio Castro-Neves, who's a 4-time winner. They're elder statesmen in this sport, but they've been beloved for decades. You make those connections with drivers or with people, and they stay, and you're able to give it to generation after generation, which is one of those things that makes Indy so special.
It's such a wonderful story you can tell through that, because as he was explaining that, I'm thinking it's like a tennis player winning a Grand Slam, and you only have to win one Grand Slam. And the one that sprang to mind, just going to show my age a little bit here, was Goran Ivanisevic winning Wimbledon in 2001.
Yep.
And a lot of tennis fans will say that was Tim Henman's best chance to win Wimbledon, because Ivanisevic was a wildcard entry. He'd been kind of out for a little while, and yet he turned up and he played well through the tournament and he got everything right, and he won Wimbledon in 2001. A little bit of assistance from the rain, things went his way, but that's sport.
Yeah.
You need things to go your way, and like you were saying about Takuma Sato, he went for glory in 2012, got it wrong, but he's got it right twice. He's learned from that experience. It's high risk, but it's also massive reward. And I love the story you were telling about Marcus Ericsson there, because I think his Formula One time didn't do him a great service in the talent that he is as a racing driver. And I think we're seeing that now. We're seeing his personality now too, which is coming through. I was listening to the race IndyCar podcast, and he was a guest on there, and he spoke really well. But he would never have been, shown in that sort of light in Formula One because, he wasn't successful. He wasn't the in thing. He had one good qualifying session in Brazil, I think in 2018, and then it all went to pot, and he was never really heard from again. But it's amazing what winning the Indy 500 does for a driver's sort of image in the media. It's just incredible. So let's wrap this show up by picking a couple of drivers, maybe three, who we think can win the race. Who are you going to go for as your winners? Potential winners.
Well, potential winners for me, number one is going to be Pato O'Ward. Personal bias aside, he's been close, and he has a team that's ready. They have a 4-car effort this year, and they've been fast all week. They have the whole McLaren trifecta thing going on. I kind of wish he would have had the Senna scheme, but whatever. He has the Le Mans one. It was funny you brought up Goran Ivanisevic, because I remember that match vividly with him and Patrick Rafter and me screaming at 7 in the morning at the TV wanting him to win. But Pato O'Ward is one that I think he has been so close this year to winning races. He wins this race. He's already theoretically the most popular driver in the series because he has the biggest fan base that show up. Texas was proof of that. He has his amigos the same way as Daniel Suarez has the amigos. Mexico should have an IndyCar race because Pato O'Ward's that good. Scott Dixon has been so close so many times in recent years. This is literally the last thing he needs to do. He wants number 7. I know he wants to be like Jimmy Johnson and have 7 championships like Dale Earnhardt, Richard Petty, and some of these other great names. But if he wins a second Indianapolis 500, I venture to think that Scott Dixon, with his kids growing up, his son starting to grow, he's going to maybe think about, I might go and switch over to the Cadillac deal and have a little more time, if he can get that second Indy 500, because he's chased it since 2009. Those are two that I can think of offhand. One person that I would say is probably a wild card pick or somebody, but has a chance to win that's kind of buried in the field. I'm just looking through here. Somebody that has been fast at Indianapolis over the years but has never really been able to close is Joseph Newgarden. Now, basically, I've taken 3 legitimate front runners, but in Newgarden's case, he's never been able to win this race, and literally that's the only thing that's missing from his resume. Basically, if he wins the Indianapolis 500, he doesn't have to worry about a job for the rest of his life because it's Penske, and Penske wants you to win the Indy 500. He's the new age Rick Mears. They hired him because the late, great Robin Miller, basically kept on badgering him and Chip Ganassi to sign him, and he's come through and he's been a champion. But if he wins the Indianapolis 500, you're going to see some real emotion out of Joseph Newgarden, because that's that last piece he's a Hall of Fame level driver, but that's the last piece in his that he needs. And I think he could come from mid-pack with the right setups and the right situation. And being that he's in 17th, right behind his teammate and Scott McLaughlin, both of them are hungry to get this victory for the captain at his house. It used to. I always said it was Roger Penske's house, and now it literally is Roger Penske's house, Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
I totally agree with Pato O'Ward. I think he's probably the favourite. He's been so quick all week. He's been quick all season, and but for a couple of tangles in Long Beach and a bit of a non-existent weekend at Barber Motorsport Park, he really should have won a race already this season. He was kind of robbed at St. Pete on the opening weekend. He was denied again in Texas, as we mentioned earlier, with the caution. Finished second at the IMS road course last weekend. So he's the favourite. But I think Alex Rossi is looking very strong as well. He's been quick all week. Indy 500 winner. Won it, I believe, on his debut, didn't he? Or something crazy like that, which is that's quite something to achieve, isn't it? Joseph Newgarden as well. I thought he would be much higher up, considering his speed at Texas earlier in the year. But Penske have a bit of a funny thing going on in recent years. I was hearing on the NBC broadcast yesterday that they just can't seem to get it together at the 500. You've got lots of other winners, obviously. Helio Castro Neves. I'm right in saying 4 is the most anyone's won the 500.
Yep.
So if
He's
he was
the
to win
fourth
it,
person to do it. Yeah.
yeah. If he was to win it, he'd be the only one with 5. You've got 2 other. Ryan Hunter-Reyes won the Indy 500.
He won it in 2014.
Yeah,
He beat Helio for that.
And Simon Pagenaud's won it. There's so many drivers who know how to close the deal. I think one we should watch out for is Colton Herta. Obviously, arguably the next big thing to come out of America and into European Formula One racing, if he can get a super license. But winning the Indy 500 would probably go quite a way to getting that.
Yeah.
He's always pretty quick when it comes to the Indianapolis 500. He's a bit buried in the order, like you said about Joseph Newgarden, but he's got the speed, he's got the talent. It's just whether he can keep it all together. That's the thing with Colton Herta, for me, is I don't see him put enough races together. I don't know, it's difficult to do that in IndyCar, but Romain Grosjean has been a model of consistency this year. He doesn't have necessarily the points to show for it, but he's been up there. Colton Herta, not always. Pato O'Ward, the same, regularly up at the front. So there's so many. We could sit here and just name everybody, and they could all win the race.
Virtually everybody.
Yeah, it's going to be absolutely thrilling. I would like to see Alex Palou win it because I think I know it's been a bit difficult, the whole contract saga between Chip Ganassi and McLaren at the end of last year, but the connection he has with his mechanics and his engineers, you could see that yesterday after they got the pole, how much it means to them, and he really does care about that team. Obviously, contracts in motorsport are never always simple, so for him and that group of guys to get that 500 win, that would be something special before he potentially moves on to McLaren, who are also looking very good around the Indianapolis Speedway. And a lot of fans would like to see McLaren win. A lot of Formula One people will be tuning in and wanting a McLaren to win. They're not likely to win the Monaco Grand Prix, so maybe this will be the one that they win this weekend. Let us know in the comments who you think is going to win the Indianapolis 500 this year. Phil, thank you so much for joining me once again. It's great having you on. You really educated me actually about the history of IndyCar and the Indy 500, and you spoke really well in your answers, so really enjoyed that. Thank you for coming on. Tell us where we can find you, where we can find Josh, your co-host for the GSP, and where we can find the GSP on social media.
Yeah, you can find me. First of all, thanks for having me on again, Aaron. When you said that you wanted to do Indy 500, I was all in on that. Even in my current state, I wanted to talk about it. I love the race, so I'm glad to have been able to help. I can keep on talking about it for the rest of the day if you really need. But you can find me at Philip G. Mathew on Twitter. You can find my co-host Joshua Fine at JP Huffine on Twitter. Our podcast is at Gripstrip Pod on Twitter. We also have a YouTube page at the Gripstrip Podcast page on YouTube, where we record all the video recordings go up there. And yeah, I mean, that's where you can find it. philipgmatthew.com is my blog site. You can find the show there. And if there's some place that you get podcasts, Amazon, Apple, et cetera, the Gripster podcast is there. So I'm working on the old episode and have that up, or later this week we'll have the greatest day in motorsports part 4 on later this week, so we can preview all 3 big races that are coming up this weekend. But again, thanks for the time, Aaron. It was a blast talking about the Indy 500.
I really enjoyed it as well. I mean, I'm fairly new to IndyCar, and it's great to get a more experienced voice on it. It's, for someone who's so often an experienced voice on Formula One, it's nice to learn about a different category and sort of take that journey again, which is always good. That's the beauty about exploring other forms of motorsport. And of course, thank you so much to you for giving up your time. I know there's a 5-hour difference between us in the time zone, so it's approaching 8 o'clock now for me. It's 3 in the afternoon for you. So thank you for giving up your time middle of the day. Really appreciate it. That's all for today. Everyone who is watching and listening, make sure you leave a thumbs up on the video. Share the podcast if you enjoyed it. Make sure you go and check out the GSP. Subscribe for more Grand Prix content. And most of all, thank you very much for watching or listening.